yet where you would force them to go back to the table? Because my understanding is they're not at the table now.
No, we're at the stage where they got to get to the table, and I got to tell them to get to the table. And they're meant to figure this out, you know. Employers are meant to deal with their employees. Employees are meant to deal with their employers. You know, I find it fascinating that some of the same people, you know, ideologically that are prone to saying government should stick out of things and not get involved are the first ones to say government needs to get involved. It's amazing to me. Completely inconsistent.
How do you think will force them to get back to the table?
Put the pressure on. They know, and look, we're dealing, I think, on both sides with professionals. They know that that's where the deal has to be made. But, you know, for too long it was short-circuited that, you know, government would intervene and they wouldn't have to do the hard work at the table. I think, you know, in BC and in other places too, I've shown, no, you're doing the hard work at the table.
Are you saying government won't go do the hard work, won't come in at the end and bring down a hammer on them?
I'm saying that I'll use every friggin' device in the Canada Labour Code that I can find to make sure that they do a deal at the table, because that's the ones that are sustained.
What's your estimate of the economic damages?
Well, we're still getting through that now, but I mean, look, I understand it's considerable, as it was with BC. I mean, you're talking about hundreds of communities that feed into the Great Lakes, trade that goes ultimately not to just other parts of Canada, but also to the U.S., Europe, and Africa. So it's sizable.
Have you spoken to either side today?
Not today, although right now our Federal Mediation and Conciliation Service, they still, even with high-profile disputes, have a 96% track record. They are amazing. They are known to both sides. They have an enormous amount of credibility. They are very good at what they do. My job is to keep the pressure on them, and to keep pressure on the employers and employees, to get them at the table and let the FMCS help them do their work.
So not today, but you have spoken to them since this.
Oh, Sunday we had extensive conversations, both Minister Rodriguez and I, and we've had conversations with Secretary Buttigieg and Acting Secretary Sue. You know, the Americans have they've got a lot going on.
What are they asking? What are they expecting of you?
Well, the same things that they expected of me in BC: keep the pressure on, get a deal done. You know. But again, the onus here is really important. It's my job to help them get their deal done.
Why do you think we saw a strike in Vancouver and now another strike in why is this particular industry so affected by these major strikes right now?
Well, I don't know. I think, 'twas ever thus, but, right now it just seems we have two high-profile ones happening, and so it feels like it's a massive trend. Again, FMCS has a 96% track record on these things. There are lots of disputes that we were able to solve because we're dealing with people who, ultimately getting a deal done is the best way to have stability for their membership and for their companies. Thank you.
It's a good day. I know. I wish I'd had this news on my way in, but yes.
Can we get your reaction to the news that this federal court has ruled in this decision?
Sure. Well, first of all, this is good news. We now have a finalized agreement on compensation for children that have been harmed through the systemically discriminatory child welfare system for generations. It's really important, obviously. It's an important win for the litigants, and I do want to thank the parties of Mashum, Trout, Dr. Blackstock, and the Caring Society and the AFN for their work on working with us as we crafted this compensation agreement. It's a historic compensation agreement. It's the largest in the history of Canada. And I think it will in no way erase the harms, but it will acknowledge the pain that many of the litigants spent. C'est un grand jour aujourd'hui pour les enfants autochtones qui souffrent un système discriminatoire. C'est une très importante étape dans notre route de la réconciliation.
On regarde what kind of timeline are we looking at now?
J'espère dans la journée
La prochaine?
J'espère dans la journée prochaine, il y a un système pour dépenser les fonds. But this is work that the Indigenous people and litigants will do to ensure that it is trauma-informed, that it works for claimants, and that it is done with the utmost sensitivity. There is a website that potential claimants can go to find out information about this work as it evolves, but this is part of the arrangement was that it wouldn't be the Government of Canada doing the process for claimants or administering the process for claimants, that it would be done by Indigenous peoples and with heavy involvement by Indigenous experts to do this in a compassionate way.
Is there something that you've learned from the residential school settlement, for example, that you're now using in this case or hoping to use in this case?
It's such a great question, actually. I wasn't a politician during the time that those settlements were arranged and that the people that were affected went through. But in fact, it did inform, I think, the litigants and the Government of Canada's perspective on how to do things differently. Many people talked about the independent assessment process of the previous compensation for residential schools as being almost impossible for some people to do. It required people to remember in great detail details of their abuse, including very graphic details. And some people had a very hard time filling out that independent assessment process and couldn't actually complete. There were also many other challenges. In large part, Indigenous people felt because the process was not designed by those that had lived experience or those that understood what litigants went through. And so this, I think, is going to be done in a much more, as I said, compassionate, trauma-informed approach by Indigenous people, by the claimants and their representatives.
This has been many years in the making, many years in the making. Do you think that getting to this point alone starts to help with any healing, or is this still sort of very raw?
This is one part of historic work on reforming child welfare systems in general. This is a compensation piece, and many of the claimants and many of the families that have spoken in various different ways over the number of years will themselves say that this doesn't heal them from the harms that they've experienced. Families were shattered. People grew up not knowing anything about their backgrounds, their true connection to culture or language. People had, in many cases, horrific experiences in multiple foster homes without the adequate care that they needed. And First Nations children with profound disabilities did not get access to the supports they needed to thrive. But it is an acknowledgement of the significant harm that discrimination, I would say systemically racist funding, results in. And so it's an important acknowledgement for those families. I know the litigants themselves will feel that they've done a huge service in terms of highlighting their experiences, but also the experiences of many other children and families in this country. The second piece of work is equally important. Sorry for the long answer, but I think it's important to understand that the work doesn't end here. There is historic work happening with Dr. Blackstock and AFN and the other parties to rework the child welfare system in a way that actually fundamentally supports children with the things they need.
What stage are we at on that? Because that is sort of the bigger piece to make sure that we don't repeat the process.
You're absolutely right, and I think it's equally important, if not maybe more important, because it has the potential to ensure that children, no matter their circumstances, have a fair chance to succeed. And so we continue to work with the parties. That work is more complex, it is harder, but I think we're getting to a good place.
Last question.
You mentioned this has been a long process, and you want to make sure that this compensation is done in a way that's trauma-informed and culturally appropriate, but how do you ensure that it also moves swiftly, as you said? What will the federal government be doing on your side to make sure that happens?
Well, I think that question in itself needs to be turned on its head. We often look to the federal government as the controlling partner in these types of arrangements, but actually the compensation is designed to be controlled and delivered by Indigenous people. Our job is to make sure the money is there, which it is, and to work with the parties to ensure that they have the tools they need in the delivery of the compensation. But I think the time has come for all of us to question how we conceptualize the federal government as having control over Indigenous peoples and really turn that on its head. This is about Indigenous people having control over a process that's long overdue.
Can we just get your thoughts overall on how you're feeling with this news?
Well, happy is a weird word, but I am happy. I'm happy that there will be peace for the litigants and the many people they represent. Je suis très heureuse pour les familles et les personnes qui sont très touchées avec cette situation. I'm very pleased as well that I've had the support of colleagues like Minister Miller and certainly the Prime Minister as we work towards this historic settlement. And I'm really hopeful that this is a signal to all future Canadian governments that we cannot be discriminatory in the way that we fund services for Indigenous peoples. This is a lesson for the country.
Thank you, everyone. On the timeline, though, I understand you don't want this to give or dictate, but you must have a wish or an idea of how long you would like it to take, because they've been waiting for years. There's been litigations for years. How quick? Can we wait 10 years? Can the victim wait 10 years?
Well, I think the pressure will be on all of us to make sure that people get compensated in a timely way.
I'm happy to follow up with you after. Thank you.
Is the thing that's the kind of, the line in the sand, this government's, refusal or just discomfort with going with the full single-payer system right now?
Look, I think we have to acknowledge that we are in a time where the fiscal framework is tight. We have to be responsible with dollars, and that we want to do as much as we can in this space. Like, we're investing a huge amount in health and to transform the health system. We've been able to save $3.5 billion through working together with provinces and territories on bulk purchasing to reduce costs for folks with drugs. And we want to make sure that we continue to reduce costs and expand coverage. And so there's good conversations ongoing with the NDP about what that framework legislation might be to set the future of pharmacare in the country. But I think that we can take our time, do it patiently, and make sure that we get it right. We're working on a bunch of different aspects of the health system at the same time as we're having conversations about this framework legislation.
Is it possible that, like, that first piece of legislation that comes, I guess, before the end of the year, it doesn't really kind of touch upon whether we're going to have a single-payer system? You just said framework. Is it more about, kind of setting the groundwork for what's going to come later, or are we going to kind of get a decision?
That's the conversation, right? That's the conversation we're having. So, we're having, I think, productive conversations about what should be in that framework legislation. But I think it's important to understand it's framework legislation. This is about pouring the foundation of a building. It's not about, moving people in. So this is as I've described it before, an iterative process. This is the foundation of that process, and I want to make sure we don't lose sight of the fact that there are huge priorities across health. That we're working on and pushing on, like you saw the announcement we made with the bilateral agreement in BC. We're going to be having other bilateral agreements come out to really show what that transformation means and where the indicators are, so people can see that change happening, positive change happening in the health system.
And what about that, though? What are the provinces saying about this pharmacare system? Are they in your ear right now saying, leave us to our own devices, don't do anything that's going to interfere, don't impose a single-payer system, or what are you hearing from the provinces right now?
Well, I mean, we have to acknowledge the complexity of the existing situation. The existing situation is that there are, the federal government is already in this space with the non-insured health benefit. We have the provinces who have their own plans, and we literally have hundreds of private plans. It's a very complicated landscape, and there needs to be meaningful engagement with all of those stakeholders as we're having a discussion of what ultimate form it might come into. So, whether or not it was in individual conversations that I've had with health ministers or the conversations that we had when all the health ministers got together, a week ago in Charlottetown, I've been having very active conversations, and as part of my conversation with all parliamentarians, saying, like, this isn't a space we can act in alone. We have to work with all of those different stakeholders, provinces, territories, and private industry as we navigate this space.
So what sort of timeline are you on, though? Because that's, I think, the question on people's minds. The deal was to the end of the year, but we're getting very close to the end of the year right now.
Shockingly, yes. The end of the year is coming much faster than I would like it to. In a generalized sense. In a specific sense, in terms of the timing, I think we have to get it right. We're talking about framework legislation. We're talking about making sure that we get to a point of consensus on the best path forward, not just in the space in terms of pharmacare, but in terms of our overall discussion about the health system and what actions we can take. My mission, we have one of the best health systems in the world. The underlying potential that's in our health system to be the best system in the world is absolutely present. We have to knock down silos. We have to make the critical investments in health workforce. We have to move forward on interoperability of data, and we have to embrace the innovation that exists and is ready to be unleashed within the system. And part of that, of course, is in the space of drugs. And so we're taking critical action on patented drugs. We're taking action on drugs for rare diseases. We're taking action on bulk purchasing, and we're having a conversation on framework legislation of pharmacare. All of those things are happening simultaneously, and in what order they will happen is where we get consensus and where we're able to move forward, then we do. But it's more important that we get it right. I think that there was set out in the Supply and Confidence Agreement the aspiration to have this legislation introduced. We're working diligently towards that, but the reality is we're not there yet. We're not in a place of concurrence yet.
Est-ce que c'est déposé ou adopté? Parce que la NPD dit qu'il faut que ce soit adopté d'ici la fin de l'année, vous venez de dire introduce, déposé. C'est pas
Oui,
la
c'est
même chose.
l'esprit. Non, c'est un bon point. Oui, je comprends le point bien, mais c'est vraiment l'esprit d'attente. C'est l'esprit d'attente et de trouver une entente avec l'NPD, avec les partis libéraux sur les questions le système de médicaments. Et pour moi, ça c'est l'intention et de présenter le projet de loi. Et si c'est possible, oui, d'adopter. Mais c'est la chose qui est plus importante que ça et de trouver une bonne solution avec les deux partis ensemble.
Can I ask about the drug pricing board? Because we saw, several members of it resign. They were called before committee. Like, where are things at with that right now? Because we have not seen the price of drugs move down in Canada in terms of what that drug pricing board is supposed to be doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we have seen, again, I'll go back to my comments on bulk purchasing. We have seen $3.5 billion in savings as a result of instigating new bulk purchasing practices. So those are very significant. And then within the space of patented drugs, we've introduced a number of different measures to take action within that space. Now, the review board of which you speak is at an arm's length, obviously, and appropriately so, to operate and give counsel and advice. I've been having some positive conversations with them about the work that they're doing, and I think that there should be more coming in the forthcoming days, exactly how they're going to continue to navigate that space. But I respect their independence and the fact that they are providing counsel and advice and reviewing these matters at an arm's length. But it's incredibly important that they fulfill their function.
So you have been meeting with them?
Yeah, I've been talking with them and will continue to be doing so. Thanks so much.
Thanks for stopping.